from Ephesians 4, verse 11 through 13. The gifts he gave were that some would be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until all of us come to the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to maturity, to the measure of the full stature of Christ. This is God's word for God's people. One of the things that we're going to share with you, I just want to frame a little bit before we get started, is that we are gifts from God to each other. And that was certainly more true, I think, at Africa University and the surrounding ministries. If you would go to the next slide, Bob. I want to review with you the purpose of our trip was to continue building a relationship with Africa University by partnering with Africa University staff and students in support of the work and missions of Africa University and the United Methodist Ministries at Old Mutare. Next slide, please. The next thing we did, very first thing we did this time was we spent a couple of days in Johannesburg. This time we were a little smarter about how we did things. We wanted to learn the culture before we actually encountered it. And so we spent time in Johannesburg learning about apartheid. That only happened about 20 years ago. And so it was still very fresh, and our guide was very good and insightful at helping us bridge our Western culture with the African culture. And so we're going to start with, I forgot where we're starting, with Rich, I think, don't we? Rich Straub is a member of Orion United Methodist Church in Illinois, and he joined us for the trip and is going to talk about the Africa University students.
Good morning. My name is Richard Straub. I come from Orion. To give you the idea of how much power your pastor has, she held up her staff, the Illinois River parted, and she allowed me to come over to this side of the river to join the mission team. I am the Illinois Great Rivers Conference Africa University chairman, and it was my pleasure to go back to Zimbabwe. Samuel, in the book of Samuel from the Old Testament, was given a directive by God to find a king that would replace Saul, because God was disappointed in Saul. And God directed him to the family of Jesse. And Jesse had 7 sons that Samuel had to kind of interview to see who would replace Saul as king. And as we as humans look at people who are in that position, we look at the outside. We look at the physical stature. We look at the handsomeness or the prettiness or the stoutness of people and the intelligence of people. God didn't have that in mind. And so every time a son from Jesse would come before before Samuel, God would tell Samuel, no, he's not the one that I have in mind. They went through all 7 sons until Samuel had asked, is there any other member of your family that is present that would be a brother of any of the 7 that I've already seen? And of course Jesse said, well, I have David, who is out being a shepherd in the field. And so Samuel brought David in, and that was the selected person to be king of Israel. And the difference was God looked at the person's heart. He didn't look at the physical stature of what his sons looked like. He looked at the heart. And that's what we were finding out in our discovery as we were talking with students about Africa University. There are many physical differences that you see between Africans and us being there as Americans. The obvious ones were skin color. Some had hair, some didn't. Some had glasses, some didn't. Some had large physical statures, some didn't. Some were small. But we all had something that was a commonality amongst all of us. And the commonality was the heart. Because, as Pastor Karen had shared, we have all been Christians and non-Christians alike that knew of God or knew of Jesus Christ. We had something in common, and that was the heart of Jesus Christ. And that was, as ambassadors of Christ, that's what our role was as individuals from America going to Africa. So in student-wise, when you see students on those slides, when we separated and they stayed in Africa and we came back to the United States, our physical bodies separated, but our commonality of the heart remained as one. And that's where we left when we left Africa. So thank you.
Rachel was not able to be with us. She's still in Nashville. She talks about on this clip, and you'll have to turn it up, Bob, because she's soft-spoken. She talks about the University Student Empowerment Union, which is a group of refugee students.
I'm excited to share with you about the University Student Empowerment Union. This is a student group of refugees who meet on campus for social and emotional support, as well as to share meal tickets and other basic necessities. I met with the union for the first time with Joe and then the second time with my mom, and we just listened to them share their stories. You could see their posture change as they shared about themselves and just let their stories be heard. A common story that was shared was that of being left orphaned by the rebels and witnessing the deaths of their entire family. Despite the trauma that we heard, I noticed that they had such an incredible grasp of hope in Jesus. They know that God is in control, and they explained to me that God was using my mom and me to show them that He sees them and He loves them. They were so grateful that someone had sought them out, and some even confessed that they only came because they didn't believe that someone was actually looking for refugee students. When you're given a number as your identity, I think it's easy to believe that you are nothing but a number or that you're invisible, and so they were amazed when they heard that someone from the United States was looking for them. And I think God was working both angles, where He gave me the desire of my heart in loving refugee students, and at the same time He used my mom and me to see them and encourage them in their suffering. I know I've been deeply humbled by the University Student Empowerment Union, and I'm standing with them in prayer, and I invite you to do the same. You can pray for their financial needs to be met, for their emotional health as the effects of PTSD surface in their lives, and for them to just experience the love of God in new ways. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing about the University Student Empowerment Union, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you, church.
Part of what we carried to Africa University were things that were sent to us to transport. And we had about 70 pounds of clergy robes that were collected by the Indiana Conference to send to the new graduating seminarians who were going out preaching for the first time. Included in that were 3 robes from Iowa. One of those robes was the robe that somebody had bought for me when I started preaching. And so I took that over as well. When we met with the graduating seminarians, they had no idea what we had in our suitcases. And we rolled in and began celebrating with worship, and then the head of the theology school said, our friends have brought us something to share with us, and we opened them up and started pulling out robes. My robe came out, and I explained to them that that was my robe, and I shared a little bit of the story, and the head of theology department, Beauty, said, we need a woman who's short for this robe. And there was a silence, and then she said, who is short? And this young lady says, oh, me, I'm short. And she came running forward and got this robe, and it fit her beautifully. It was like it was just for her. What a joy to hand out those robes, knowing that these folks were going out preaching in some very rural areas and were dressed for the occasion. Our next person, Bob, you'll have to help me. Marlene. Marlene is from St. Paul's Lutheran Church. She's a lab technician, retired now, right? And she's going to talk about AU Clinic and labs.
Well, yes, I spent 40 years in the lab, so they could hardly pull me out of the lab, the clinic lab. It's like, Marlene, we have to move on. But the thing that affected me the most was the lack of equipment that they had. I guess if you walked into the lab, it would look much like maybe a high school lab. There wasn't any of the fancy equipment working. We had toured the place originally, and I was all excited because I saw 2 instruments, one for chemistry and one for counting cells. And When I got back there, I realized that neither of those were usable because they didn't know how to use them, nor did they have the things, the reagents that they would need to use that. It's unfortunate just how behind their health systems are, even if I'm thinking that even in the larger cities, you know, what is common for us to just go get a blood draw is a major deal for them and may take long lengths of time to be completed because of the availability of getting that equipment. The clinic at the university was fairly modern and very and probably would be equivalent to what you would see at most universities of some type of size. And it was a safe place for students to go with their concerns. They could come with minor health issues or concerns. If they were just kind of exhausted and needed a place to rest, they could do that also. But I think one of the stories I told, and it was not necessarily lab-related, but when we visited the hospital, there was this beautiful operating table that was brand new, and there was this beautiful operating light, and they were just so proud of it. And as we looked around the room, all the windows were open. Now, you all know that that's not what our operating rooms look like. You know, they're very sterile and very precise. And so my heart breaks that they are not able at this time and this age have the accessibility of medicine like we do. And it's a real hardship on the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. You've heard Gary talk about the Africa University Farm. He's going to share some stories with you now.
Good morning. If you take a look at the bottom right picture as you're sitting there, that is a unit that was not running when we got there. It's called a people mover, supply mover. The little tractor was sitting in the shop in need of repair, and I was able to help Francis, the main shop gentleman, to get it running the very first day we were there then. If you go to the, look at either one of the John Deere, that's a brand new disc that was delivered on, excuse me, delivered on Tuesday. It either came from Germany or Brazil, and we were asked to pray over the new disc, and we did that with Pastor Karen's help as well. The bottom one is our team, part of our team. I think most of the team is in there, and the farm workers. So they were excited about that new disc as well, especially the drivers that did the work for the field. The upper picture there on your right is Rich and I and forgot his name now, but he is the student that is there, working there at this time, part-time with the crew and part-time student. We were putting a ROP back on that particular tractor, and that tractor is probably not being used yet, but they're getting it ready for planting the crops, and we needed that ROP back on it, but it has tire problems, some large cracks and tears in the tires that need to be replaced, and they have no money for doing that right now, so it'll be an earlier project. That tractor there also, that was new in 2012, and so we were able to see that in 2013 when we were there. One other thing that's not up there is we also set out to make a new building for the equipment, especially for that John Deere disc. I was asked to help with that, and we went to town and actually got 3 bids on that particular building. And as part of my job was that I also went over those bids and recommended which supplier we should buy that from, or they should buy that from. So at this time, when we went there before, it was 2,588 laying hens. They now have 4,000 and producing 90% at this point. So that's a great improvement. They've also have goats and sheep, which was a class project, which the next class was not able to continue it, so it's now part of the farm. They also have a fish hatchery and that there too, but it's only on minor because they can't get the water right now. But that's another class project. Another thing that they have is rabbits, and another class project that is now part of the farm. So they are taking on a lot of extras as well. They now also farm 145 hectares with irrigation as well. So, they're coming up, but they still need other things to do or to work with over there, and that is work on the equipment. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Celia Burns is a member of St. John's United Methodist Church, and she was particularly struck by a ministry called Eshe Enesu, which I think means God with us, doesn't it? I think it does, yep.
Moanani.
Moanani.
It's good morning in Shona, and I can say that because Rachel is not here to correct my pronunciation. So I'm safe. I'd like first to thank Asbury for supporting this program. I'm very grateful for having had the opportunity to go to Africa with this group. It was a wonderful trip. It was intriguing. It was fascinating. And you should go next time. I'm reporting on this after-school program run by the Hilltop United Methodist Church. I wasn't terribly enthused about visiting the program. I figured an after-school program would probably do a little tutoring with the children and probably keep them out of trouble after school. I was wrong. The children are chosen from the surrounding hillside around the church. They live in houses that we would consider a one-car garage with about 4 families to a garage. The parents sleep on top of the bed, the children sleep underneath, we're told, so you have some idea of the conditions the children are being raised in. School fees are $30 a semester, 3 times a year. They're on the British system. So an average farm worker at Africa University makes $70 a month. So you can imagine the sacrifice it is to try and put all your children through school. And frequently, some don't get to go. So the children are chosen because their parents can't pay the school fees. 1 child per family is allowed to attend the after-school program. At the program, they have their school fees paid, they're given 2 sets of uniforms a year, their medications are paid if they need, they are tutored, and they're also taught knitting and sewing on one of those wonderful old Singer crank hand machines, which I hope I'm not the only one here remembers using. Well, we won't ask for a show of hands. The program is run by 2 women, one of whom is on paid staff because she's the assistant minister at the church. The other one works at the program because she believes she is called by God to serve these children, and she receives no paycheck. So this is my tip to any business people out there. Hire people who don't want a paycheck, and you'll have very efficient business. They get a fantastic return. Additionally, when the children finish school, the program pays for them either to go to vocational school or to Africa University, which is about $5,000 a year. In this way, Each family has a breadwinner, and the church has reached out to the community in the surrounding area and elevated the standard of living for the entire community surrounding the church. It's an extraordinary program that is working very effectively, and frankly, I can only describe it as inspired. I'd like to comment, too, that the program started in 2000, so it's been going for about 15 years. And some children have graduated from the program and have come back to the church and said, this is such a huge benefit in my life, I want to sponsor the younger children in the program. So it's come full circle in its success. And they're inching towards being more independent, not just being supported by American churches, but to really be Africa supported and maintained, which I found enormously impressive. I'd like to encourage you to consider prayerfully donating to the program. Karen has the information. You can do so through the United Methodist Board. I know the first thing I did when I got home was to write them a check. It was probably for more than I should have written it, but I will manage, and they may not. So please do consider this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sue. Roy Roberts is a member of Hedrick, did I get it? Hedrick United Methodist Church. It's out by Ottumwa, and he's going to talk about meeting Janine Roberts and the Fairfield Children's Home.
When I went to Africa, one of the things I wanted to do was to meet with the children at a orphanage. It's called the Fairfield Children's Home. And there was a young lady by the name of Janine Roberts who was my inspiration. She went to Africa as a young girl in her early 20s, just out of theological school. And she had this passion to go to Africa, so she went to this orphanage. We call it Children's Home. And when she got there, she found deplorable conditions. There were rows of rusty beds or cribs that infants were in. The only attention these kids got or when the nurse would pick them up and feed them, then they were put right back in their crib. I didn't know what I was going to run into when I went to this children's home, but as soon as myself or anyone else in the group got off of the van, there were children everywhere, tugging at your hand, tugging at your heart, and they would lead you around to their homes, and they had no problem showing you where they lived, where their bedroom was, where their closet was, where their clothes were. And as you sat and talked to these children or read books or sang with them, one of them would sneak off to the kitchen and take an ear of white corn, not yellow corn, and they would slice the kernels off and they'd put them in a pan and they'd roast them on the stove, and they'd come in, and that was like candy to them. And the first person that they would give it to would be the visitor, which is me, and then they would share it among the other 8 to 10 children that were living in these homes. The children's ages ran from 4 months to 25 years of age. The 4-month-old child probably got the most attention because there were 79 children that were so proud of this 4-month-old that they wanted everybody to see him. Their playground equipment was, if it was in any playground in the United States, would not be used because it was old, it was rusty, and it was basically unsafe. But these kids were playing on it. They would use a bottle cap, which they'd put plastic in, and they use that as a hockey puck. And through their imagination, they would make more games than our children would ever think possible. There was a corrugated steel pipe that you would usually put underneath the driveway for drainage. And they had painted that, and they would crawl inside that and roll it down the hill. They would play volleyball without a net. They were tremendous, and how could you not have feelings for children whose name are Charity and Gift and Tendai and Simba and Jane and Precious and More Blessing? One thing that Janine wrote in her book is if you go to Zimbabwe or you go to Africa and you leave Africa and you don't feel a tug at your chest, then you don't go back. And as I say, every day I get this tug. In closing, I just want to, and I'll try to get through this again, is a letter from Abigail to me and to the group. From Abigail to Roy. I love you, Roy. Thank you for coming. I miss you. I will be very happy when I see you again. I was wanting to write this letter for you so that I will remember you and you remember me. I love you. At Fairfield, people will be sad when you go. I'll be sad when you go. Your loving friend, Abigail. And Fairfield Children's Home are saying goodbye. We love you all.
Beck Parrish was a leader of the children's ministry team, and she had a mission. She'll talk about that reading ministry.
Hi, everyone. So when we knew that we were going to go back to African University, we planned on visiting the Fairfield Children's Home, which is only 2 miles away, and we asked them what it is that they needed, what it is that they wanted us to do. Now, maybe you heard from Marlene. I want you to understand that one of the things that we're learning is that oftentimes people will take things and they give them or donate them to places like African University or Fairfield, and they're things that we perceive that place would want or would need, and yet we haven't asked them what they would want or need, and so they are of no use to them. They don't know how to use the medical equipment. They might not know how to use something. They might not actually want the well right there. They might want it someplace else. So we are learning to ask them and then to come alongside of the group and encourage them in their usage and let them take ownership and actually the direction. Let us follow them. That's a hard thing to learn for an American and all. So we asked them what they would like at Fairfield Children's Home, and they wanted books. The children were on school break, and so we were able to read with them and encourage them, and as you saw from Roy, they were encouraged to write, and so we were helping them out in that area. We were able to become a part of their family and to be able to realize that both they and we are orphans, adopted by the Father God into one family. And they asked us not to call Fairfield an orphanage. It's a children's home, and it's the home of these children. And it's wonderful to have them be a part of their family, for us to be a part of their family.
Carol Jackson will share about a road trip we took to Buhara United Methodist Church.
When we were planning our trip, we decided we wanted to, there is a VIM team there at Africa University, and we wanted to partner with them and to join with them in a mission that they choose. Once again, we wanted to make sure we do what they want to do. When we got there, the VIM team from Africa University said that they wanted to donate some desks to Buhara, and this is a village that is a 3-hour drive from Africa University, and they have a church, and they were starting building a school. So we put together with Africa University money to purchase 25 desks. This was enough desks to fill one schoolroom. There are 50 students in this schoolroom, and each desk seated 2. They were pleased to get the desk, but what we found out was they were more pleased that we came. We took this 3-hour drive. The last 30 miles was on, I think you call it a road. It didn't look like a road. It was very rough. It was very hard. It took about 40 minutes to get there. We picked up people along the way to go to church with us, and we were part of their church service. Pastor Karen did the sermon. she asked the pastor there, because they didn't speak English, to interpret. So she'd say 2 sentences, and he'd say a few sentences, and she'd say a few, and the more it went on, the more animated the other minister got, and Pastor Karen got more animated, and it was really fun to see her really open up, and that service was so neat. It only lasted 2.5 hours, and it seemed like it went by very fast. There was 4 churches there. Because they had visitors, they came from miles around, walked to come see us and be a part of that service. The pastors from the other, representatives from the other churches were presented, and there was also a chief there. The pastor afterwards, I said to him, I said, there's no way you were saying the same words she was saying. It took you so much more time to say them. He says, our language does not have words that give expressions, so he had to say more words to get the expressions across. And he said, but the trip that you made meant so much more to us than the desk, because people don't come to see us. We appreciate the fact that you take the time to be with us and come see us. And that's what the trip was all about, was partnering alongside and encouraging people that God is important to even them.
Joe Weiniger is at a graduation, but she did do a video for us. She's going to talk about how she connected with Cecilia, who's in charge of the children's home, and also about a farewell tea.
Hi, I'm Joe Weiniger, and I'd like to share a couple of the highlights of our trip to Africa University in Zimbabwe, Africa. One of the highlights for me was the opportunity to work with Cecilia, who was the acting director of the children's home. She had asked our team if there was anyone who would be able to teach her how to use an accounting software that was on her computer, but which she didn't know how to use. I spent time with her and taught her how to enter information and how, with the click of a mouse, she could create accounting reports. You can imagine how excited she was to learn that she would be able to do everything on the computer that she had been doing manually. Another highlight for me was the farewell tea given the last day we were on campus. It was hosted by the student VIM team. There were about 10 to 12 students there, nearly all of them representing a different country from Africa. At the end of the tea, we all stood in a circle and held hands and said a prayer. Each member of the VIM team said a prayer for our safe return in their native language. You can imagine how moving that was. At the end of the prayer, most of our team had tears in our eyes because it was so impressive. I want to thank you for your prayers while we traveled to Africa University.
We're going to go again in October of 2017, so mark your calendar.
At this time, if the ushers would prepare to wait upon us so that we can give from the bounty that God has given us to continue the ministry both of this church and of this denomination, but also that as that money trickles out to places like Africa University to support and to continue the work of Christ in this world.
to say, son, pray to the Lord. I remember my man when I was a little boy. My mother used to say, son, oh, pray to the Lord. My man, when I was a little boy, my mother used to say, son, pray to the Lord. I remember my man, when I was a little boy, my mother used to say, son, oh, pray to the Lord.
This world is no longer